But in terms then of the golden rules that we've actually found, you know, I think critical is actually getting your data right. You know, and spending time on getting your data right is absolutely critical. I joined the organisation towards the end of 2007, and it took me and my team approximately just over 1 year in order to develop our baseline and our methodology in order to monitor our carbon footprint. The reason why was for various reasons. We had data dispersed through time and geography. You know, different offices dealt with energy bills, and trying to pull all that together, for example, was actually very difficult. Secondly, in terms of the initial methodologies that we developed, they were sort of taken in under sort of high level of scrutiny by our staff. Natural England employs a lot of scientists and people, you know, who are very interested in data and evidence and statistics and that side of things. And as soon as we started to put anything out there, people began to critique it and ask, well, what's the assumptions behind this? How did you measure that? So we felt we wanted to take a lot of time in terms of actually developing our evidence base. And we feel that the value of doing that actually enabled us to actually develop a methodology that is actually been very helpful in both communicating the carbon message across the organisation, but likewise enables us to actually report on a monthly basis in terms of our overall carbon emissions. I won't go into that process here because I think obviously timescales and everything like that preclude that, but always happy to talk to people afterwards, or I'll give you my email address at the end, and happy to obviously correspond with people about our methodology and our systems behind that. So as I say, data in itself is critical. Yeah, as I can't overemphasize that as much. Get the data right, get the evidence right, then you've got the credibility in order to take forward your programme of carbon reduction or sustainability improvement. Second area is around employee engagement, and perhaps use a bit of a traditional view of the public sector, if not even in the private sector. You know, if your chief executive says jump, people jump. If you say jump twice, you jump twice. If your chief executive says keep on jumping, you keep on jumping. But as soon as the chief executive's back is turned, everyone stops. You know, because that's the nature. You know, because that's not. You know, the idea of jumping is not necessarily ingrained within the culture. And I think with a lot of the sustainability activity that we've done within many organisations that I've worked for previously, the whole sustainability message has come from the top, from the chief executive, who effectively has said, I want it this way. I want people to do this. We're going to have very clear rules about what you can do, and equally very clear rules about what you can't do. And yet the reality is, as I mentioned in my introduction, you know, many of these ideas around programmes for sustainability actually begin to fizzle out very quickly because it's not ingrained in the organisational culture. So, you know, employee engagement is probably as critical as the data side, because what you have to remember is that employees are actually part of the solution. They're not necessarily the problem. Yes, in terms of their behaviours and perhaps overcoming some of the real sticking in the mud type approaches towards people not wanting to shift towards more sustainable behaviours, you know, that can actually be quite challenging. But no less, you should actually engage with your staff, talk to them about how we can actually improve on our sustainability performance. And to give you an example, a couple of years ago at Natural England, we wanted to develop a green travel policy. At that time, people felt they'd been done unto by the amount of change that had gone on within the organisation during the preceding year or two. And we felt that we wanted to take a very different approach towards the way in which we actually engage with employees. So what we essentially did was we developed what we called a 30 green travel policy options, which we presented as being almost like a pick and mix of policies that could eventually end up in the overall green travel policy. And these varied from the universally acceptable, you know, we'll provide some folding bikes in our offices so people can actually utilise them in order to travel to the train station, etc., etc., all the way through to the perhaps not so popular, we'll actually have a cap on the amount of miles that people can actually travel on a daily basis using their own car, for example. And those are actually put out there, not necessarily as I say, a pick and mix, although that was actually presented, but as a way of actually engaging our staff's enthusiasm for green travel, but likewise understanding some of the barriers and the risks associated with changing the way in which you travel as an organisation. And yes, we did get the initial response of very negative views. You know, people effectively saying, if you tell me to do this, if I have to do this, I cannot do my job. But the result was, through the whole series of workshops that we had across our offices, plus the questionnaires and the email responses and the communications that we put out about that, the result was actually that we actually ended up with a green travel policy that only had 3 policies in it. Essentially, policy number 1 was that people would actually look at some form of travel hierarchy before travelling, so looking at sustainable options to begin with and then moving down towards car and air travel towards the end. Policy 2 was around us obviously prioritising delivery of our efforts in terms of supporting those people with the biggest carbon footprints. And the third one really came from staff telling us, well, don't tell us what to do. You know, we're best placed in order to understand how we travel and why we travel in particular ways within the organisation. Basically, tell us what our carbon footprint is and give us the tools in which to deliver, and we'll actually go away and we'll actually deliver a carbon reduction for you. And from that, we essentially set up a policy around that, which required teams to develop their own team carbon reduction plans and targets and make a commitment to that. And we set up a system by which we could actually monitor that on a monthly basis. And although at the beginning of the year, and this was back at the beginning of 2009-10 financial year, we had predicted a 17% reduction in our overall travel by the commitments that staff had made. We actually ended up with a 25% reduction at the end of the year. And that was very much because people felt engaged in the whole process and felt that they actually had ownership of the issue themselves. So as I say, employees are part of the solution, so engage them, you know, work with them, you know, on finding solutions to the challenges you face. And equally, don't just simply go down the compliance route. Policies, rules, etc., very difficult and don't normally result in the responses that you would like. Thirdly, leadership, and I won't really say much about leadership because I think most of it's already out there in terms of the public domain. You know, characteristic leadership are very much around inspiring others to change, you know, acting consistently and motivating others by words or actions themselves. From an environmental management point of view, most of you will know that in order to set up an environmental management system, you need the commitment of your board and your chief exec, etc., in order to sort of endorse the policies and to move that forward. But our view has been thinking more not only about our senior level leadership within the organisation, but also leadership, you know, at lower levels. And we have, for example, a thriving sustainability champions group, which are people who are effectively living and breathing sustainability through their daily work lives and also within their home lives as well. And they act as really sort of exemplars to others and people who people can approach in order to talk about the current issues that they're facing around the sustainability side. So leadership, you know, is very much around walking the walk and talking the talk. Particularly at the senior level, you know, if you have your senior people not necessarily doing anything around their own carbon footprints, then obviously the organisation loses credibility and you quickly find people, you know, who basically say, well, if they're not doing it, I'm not doing it side of things. But nonetheless, if you do engage with the board and with senior people, you know, then there's ways in which you can actually promote that across the organisation. For example, my own organisation, the board has just reduced its carbon footprint of travel by 20%. Everyone travels now by standard class, so there's no first class travel whatsoever, and they're also utilising video and teleconferencing, obviously, wherever possible.